They handed me a paperclip, at the will reading, in a velvet-lined box, while my cousins unwrapped Rolexes, trust funds, and ski homes. The family lawyer turned to me and said, "To Mara Collins, a single paperclip." The room burst into laughter. One uncle even clinked his champagne glass. What they didn't know was that the paperclip opened a vault, and inside that vault was a name, mine, and the empire they thought belonged to them was already under my command. My name is Mara Collins, age 38, former U.S. Army intelligence officer, retired with honors, and with scars no medal ceremony ever acknowledged. I don't wear the uniform anymore. I don't keep ribbons in shadow boxes or flags in glass cases, but I remember codes, coordinates, loyalties, and silence. The thing about coming home from war is, sometimes the battlefield greets you at your family's dining table. They like to say I checked out, that I lost my way. What really happened, I stepped away from a family that measured worth in board appointments and quarterly returns, not in sacrifice, not in service, not in blood dried into the lining of combat boots. Growing up, the Collins name meant one thing: money. My grandfather, Richard Collins, was a decorated colonel turned venture capitalist, a man who built empires from shattered economies, a war hero who never smiled in photographs but commanded respect in every boardroom. To them, he was legacy. To me, he was the only person in that family who didn't flinch when I said I wanted to serve. My father, Gregory Collins, wasn't impressed. "Intelligence, that's not even real combat," he scoffed. "You're wasting your degree." My mother just pursed her lips and looked away. They wanted a daughter who wore navy suits, not desert camouflage. They wanted someone who played the market, not decoded insurgent chatter under blackout tents. I left for the Army at 22. By 29, I had served across 3 continents, cracked multiple counterterrorism networks, and buried 2 friends. I came back different, quieter, less suitable for cocktail parties. The year I returned stateside, the family held a gala. Lucas, my cousin, the Golden Hedge Fund boy, gave a speech. They introduced him as the future of Collins Capital. No one introduced me. No one even asked where I'd been. So I moved, found a small apartment in Virginia, took consulting work no one in my family cared to understand, lived alone, intentionally. And for the next few years, we spoke in tax season pleasantries and forced Christmas texts. Nothing more. They forgot the soldier. They remembered the shadow, until last fall, when I got the email from the family attorney. The last will and testament of Richard C. Collins will be executed on December 12th at 10 a.m. No explanation, no condolences, just a location and a time. I hadn't seen my grandfather in nearly 5 years. The last time, he'd called me to his study at 6:47 a.m. Military time, of course. He poured coffee into 2 dented mugs and said, "You know what I admire most about you, Mara? You disappear when you need to. That's not weakness. That's strategy." Then he handed me an old copy of The Art of War with his notes scrawled in the margins. That was it. No hugs, no speeches, just a transmission between soldiers. So when the will reading came, I didn't expect much. A watch maybe, a note, instead. I walked into that marble-walled conference room and saw 22 seats filled. Every cousin, every in-law, all dressed in their best navy blue and entitlement. And when the lawyer called my name and handed me that velvet box, with a paperclip inside, the room exhaled in synchronized amusement. I didn't laugh, I didn't ask questions. Because if there's one thing the military teaches you, it's that sometimes the quietest signal carries the most explosive message. The Collins Family Trust had always been handled by Whitaker, Dalton, and Pierce, a law firm so old its letterhead still used serif fonts and wax seals on formal notices. Their downtown office felt more like a courtroom than a conference room. High ceilings, glass walls, walnut paneling, and that sterile scent of wealth, leather, cologne, and old power. I arrived on time, not early, not late. I wore black slacks, a dark gray blazer, and a plain white blouse. No makeup, hair tied back, dog tags tucked inside my shirt. They noticed, but no one said a word. My parents were already seated near the front, of course. Dad in a tailored navy suit, legs crossed like he owned the room. Mom wore pearls, posture perfect, expression unreadable. Across from them sat Lucas, flanked by his fiancée and his ego. He barely glanced at me. Why would he? To him, I'd become the faded branch on the family tree, the one they cropped out in holiday newsletters. I took a seat near the far end of the table, no nameplate, no greeting, just silence. The kind of silence you don't break because deep down, they're hoping you'll do it first. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the double doors opened. Mr. Alden Whittaker entered with a thick binder and zero expression. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice measured like a metronome. "We are gathered to execute the final will and private instructions of Colonel Richard C. Collins. May he rest in peace." He didn't pause for sentiment. This wasn't a eulogy, it was a chess match. He began reading names. To Aunt Julia, the beach house in Nantucket. To Cousin Eli, the stock options in the aerospace fund. To Lucas, the majority stake in Collins Capital, along with a vintage Breitling timepiece that had once belonged to our grandfather. Applause, chuckles, nods of approval around the room. Then came my mother. To his daughter-in-law, Diane Collins. "Mr." Whittaker cleared his throat. The sapphire necklace originally belonging to a leaner Collins, and 15% of the family foundation's voting rights. She smiled like a queen being coronated. My father reached over and squeezed her hand. And then, Whittaker looked down at a small, separate slip of paper. To Myra Elizabeth Collins. He blinked almost imperceptibly. A single silver paperclip, delivered in private custody. No further comments in this reading. At first, no one reacted. Then, Lucas snorted. Someone coughed, half laughter, half disbelief. A paperclip. One cousin whispered behind her hand. "Maybe she'll hold the family files together," another muttered. I didn't move. My father leaned back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. "Well," he said, "I suppose not all battles come with a victory parade." My mother didn't even look at me, just lifted her champagne glass with a polite smile. They thought it was over. But that's the thing about quiet people, they don't flinch, they remember. I placed the box on the table in front of me, slowly opened it, revealing the single silver paperclip nestled in dark velvet. No note, no instructions, just metal, cold, silent like them. "Is that it?" Someone finally asked. Whittaker folded the file, then he paused. "There is one private addendum," he said, addressing the room without meeting anyone's eyes. "Per Colonel Collins's final instruction, it is to be shared with Ms. Collins only, in private." The room shifted. You could hear a cufflink click against glass. The tension was instant, unspoken but screaming. "Private?" my father asked, voice sharp. "I wasn't informed of this." "You weren't meant to be," Whittaker replied calmly. My mother's eyes narrowed. Lucas looked genuinely confused for the first time all morning. "If you'll follow me, Ms. Collins," the lawyer added, gesturing to the adjoining office. I stood. No words, no eye contact. Only silence, and the soft brush of my boots on marble as I walked away. Paperclip in one hand, box still open. And behind me, a room full of people still laughing at a gift they didn't understand. The adjoining room was nothing like the grand conference hall behind me. No chandeliers, no polished oak. Just a simple space, glass walls, black carpet, and one steel desk in the center. On it sat a sealed envelope and a heavy-looking key card in a brushed metal sleeve. Mr. Whittaker closed the door behind us with a soft click. He didn't speak, didn't offer a chair, just gestured toward the envelope like it was a relic from a battlefield. I stepped forward. My name was written in ink I recognized. My grandfather's hand. "Colonel Collins left explicit instructions," Whittaker said quietly. "No one else was to read this, not even me." I nodded. He left the room without waiting for a reply. The envelope was thick, hand-sealed with a dark green wax stamp. Pressed into it was the shape of an eagle, military insignia style, but not one I recognized from any division. Not Army, not Marines, this was custom. I cracked the seal. Inside were 4 pages, handwritten, sharp, purposeful. At the top, just 2 words, Operational transfer. Myra, if you're reading this, it means the family got exactly what they expected. A laugh at your expense. An inheritance they could count and divide because they never earned anything they didn't inherit. You were never like them, that's why this is yours. I sat down, slowly, read the letter again, this time with my pulse pounding in my ears. It wasn't sentiment, it was strategy. Years ago, I began diverting a portion of the family's offshore holdings into a series of controlled military-aligned investment vehicles. Funds no one in the family even knows exist. They were built not to make noise, but to preserve the kinds of missions I believed in. The quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the people left behind when the cameras stopped rolling. I created a trust, codename Valkyrie, structured across 3 shells, registered in Singapore, Zurich, and Nevada, hidden in plain sight behind a real estate portfolio and philanthropic foundation. You now control it, all of it. Attached was a card. Matte black, no logo, just an embedded chip and a QR code etched on the back. Underneath was a smaller envelope containing a vault access credential and a time-sensitive clearance code. Inside the vault is what I never gave your father, your cousins, or any board member. Not just money, not just shares, but vision, and the tools to make it real if you're brave enough to lead. My hands were trembling. The final paragraph was short, brutal, true. You didn't need a throne, Mara, you needed a war room. This is yours, don't waste it trying to be polite. RCC, it wasn't a goodbye. It was an activation order. Within the folder was a single black and white photo. A younger version of my grandfather, standing beside a military jeep, holding something small in his hand. A silver paperclip, scrawled on the back, used to hold war plans together. Seemed fitting. 2 hours later, I was standing in front of a biometric vault on the 47th floor of a nondescript office building downtown. No signage, no front desk, just a private elevator with no buttons, only a card reader. When I inserted the chip and placed my thumb on the sensor, the elevator descended. Not up, down. The doors opened to a room colder than any bunker I'd ever been in. A single screen on the wall flickered to life. Welcome, Director Collins. Below it, a second prompt. Confirm operational activation of Project Valkyrie. And beneath that, assets under management, $317 million. Primary directive. Strategic deployment in service of post-military reintegration, legacy preservation, and covert opportunity development. This is the war they never knew you were trained for. Initiate. I pressed my finger on the glass, felt the click, watched the system unlock, and in that moment, I wasn't the girl who got the paperclip anymore. I was the one who knew what to do with it. They still thought they'd won. The next day, my cousin Lucas posted a photo, him holding a glass of champagne, captioned, "Legacy is earned, not handed. Next generation Collins Capital." I didn't like it, didn't comment, didn't flinch, because what he didn't know was that the Collins Capital he just inherited was already on a list I now owned. By noon, I had already met with 3 of the trust's hidden advisors, a former JAG attorney, a retired cybersecurity lead, and one woman I once knew from Kandahar who now ran a network of shadow donors funding post-military startup initiatives. They knew my name, they'd been waiting. Back at my apartment, my father's name appeared on my phone screen. I let it ring. Twice. Then, text. Just checking in. Hope you're not too disappointed. It was good seeing you yesterday. The gall. He'd watched me receive nothing and had the audacity to pretend he was being kind. Or maybe he truly believed it. Maybe in his world, a paperclip was a punchline. Not a blueprint. My mother's message came later that evening. Your cousin's gala is next Friday. If you'd like to attend, we'll save a seat near the back for you. How generous, I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, not anymore, but because now. I had work to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I operated like I'd never left the military. Schedule, targets, mission objectives, asset reallocation, quietly liquidated one property portfolio in the Cayman Islands and redirected the funds to a new holding under Valkyrie Trust. Personnel audit, identified 2 board members in Collins Capital's philanthropic arm who were double-dipping grants, forwarded anonymous reports to the IRS. Phase 1 deployment. Established 3 satellite funds focused on veteran-owned businesses, encrypted infrastructure, and classified tech R&D. Every move I made was silent. Precise. Strategic. Just like he taught me. 3 nights in, I returned to the vault. Alone, the air in the chamber was still. The kind of stillness that only exists in secure environments and after certain funerals. I placed the silver paperclip inside a glass case beside the screen and typed in a single phrase. The real legacy is operational. The system responded, directive acknowledged. Meanwhile, the Collins family went on celebrating. Lucas gave interviews. My father hosted a private board luncheon. My mother was quoted in a lifestyle magazine talking about the importance of tradition in modern wealth. They had no idea. They still thought legacy meant yachts and hedge funds and articles in Forbes. Let them. Then came the invitation. From the Geneva Institute for Global Philanthropy, requesting my presence as a founding partner of the Valkyrie Civil Initiative. They'd received the first donation, $15 million, anonymously routed through my newly registered public-facing entity, Valor Holdings. And this is where the story splits. Because on one side, they still believe I'm the family disappointment, the girl with the military past and no market value, and on the other side, I now hold the power to fund, destroy, build, and redirect everything they think they control. But I wasn't rushing to tell them. Because as my grandfather once said, the most dangerous soldier is the one who already knows the terrain and doesn't need a parade. I scheduled my first public appearance in 6 years. Not at a board meeting, not at a Collins family event, but at a veterans' round table at Capitol Hill where I spoke about the silent battle every soldier faces when the war ends and the headlines stop. And behind me, a backdrop reading, The Valkyrie Fund, for those who were forgotten. Founded by Mara E. Collins, to them I had been erased, but quietly, line by line, I was writing myself back in. The Collins Family Foundation Gala was always held at the Wyndham Regency. Top floor, crystal chandeliers, skyline views, same room, same guest list, same unspoken game of polished power and proximity. This year's theme, Legacy in Motion. The irony burned, I arrived alone. Black evening suit, hair pulled into a clean bun, dog tags tucked inside a satin inner pocket. I wore no jewelry, except for a small silver paperclip pin on my lapel. Custom made, subtle, intentional. The guards at the door didn't recognize me. I wasn't on the main list, but I didn't need to be. Mr. Whittaker, who, it turned out, was also on the gala's board, greeted me with a firm nod. "Evening, Director Collins," he said, just loud enough for the nearest donor to hear. I didn't smile, just returned the nod. "Let's go," I said. Inside, the room glowed gold. Waiters floated like shadows. Guests clinked glasses and discussed impact investing like it was poker. Lucas was already holding court near the center. His arm wrapped around the vice president of a tech fund he couldn't spell 5 years ago. My mother stood nearby, wearing navy silk and her best curated smirk. My father, laughing with a former senator. None of them saw me enter, until the screen behind the podium flickered. The MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at this year's Collins Foundation Gala. Tonight, we honor a new legacy partner who has transformed what legacy can mean. Beyond wealth, beyond titles, beyond blood." Heads tilted. Our keynote guest is a veteran, a strategist, a silent benefactor of programs you've likely praised without knowing her name. Tonight, please welcome to the stage, Director Mara Collins. For a moment, just a beat too long, the room froze. I stepped into the spotlight, 1 foot forward. Then the next, not fast, not theatrical, just inevitable. My father's smile cracked. Lucas blinked like the screen had glitched. My mother, her champagne glass dipped ever so slightly. I passed them without looking, but I heard it. "She's what? Since when?" I thought she... I stood behind the podium, eyes steady. No paper, no notes, only presence. Most of you don't know me. Some of you forgot I existed. That's fine. My name is Mara Collins, and I'm not here tonight because of who I'm related to. I'm here because someone believed legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you carry. Quietly, relentlessly, without applause. My grandfather, Colonel Richard C. Collins, left behind more than capital. He left a choice, and I chose to use it. The Valkyrie Fund, our newest partner, was built not to impress this room, but to fund those the world forgets. Veterans, widows, silent fighters who never made the gala list. Behind me, the screen changed. Photos of funded projects appeared. A startup run by a double amputee Marine. A school for children of military families. A microfinance program for survivors of domestic abuse. A black and white image of a woman holding a paperclip, her face unreadable, captioned, "Don't mistake quiet for small." Applause started slow, uncertain, then spread, clapping like rain on steel, not because they understood, but because they had to. The spotlight dimmed, I stepped down. Lucas didn't speak. He just stared, like a man watching the tide realize it's not the moon pulling it, but gravity he can't argue with. My mother reached for my arm. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice tight. I paused, looked her in the eye. "You never asked," I said. "You were too busy counting what I didn't get." Mr. Whittaker appeared beside me with a glass of water. "They'll be processing this for years," he said under his breath. I nodded. "Good, let them." By the end of the night, people were whispering. Not about Lucas, not about dividends. About a paperclip, a veteran, and a legacy no one saw coming. And that was the point, because I didn't show up to be celebrated. I showed up to be seen. The morning after the gala, my phone lit up with missed calls, 4 from Lucas, 2 from my father, 1 from a number labeled Collins PR Department. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I brewed black coffee in silence, opened my notebook, and wrote 2 words at the top of the page. Disengagement protocol. Not revenge, not escalation, just the cleanest kind of power move there is. Exit, with intention, on your own terms. Later that week, I met with my team at Valkyrie HQ. The real team, not the family-friendly version. We were 8 now, a strategist from defense, a disbarred whistleblower turned compliance expert, a poet turned philanthropy analyst, and 5 others who'd once been invisible in the same way I had. They didn't care about surnames. They cared about momentum. I looked around the war room, walls covered in modular whiteboards, digital maps, and timelines that bled into 2028. Then I said it. We're exiting the Collins umbrella. Quietly. Completely. Permanently. Phase 1, I contacted Whittaker with a simple instruction. Transfer remaining Collins-tied assets under Valkyrie to a neutral trust. Lock out all non-operational stakeholders, effective immediately. He didn't blink. He'd expected this. Clean break, he asked. Cleaner than they deserve, I replied. Phase 2, I resigned publicly and formally from the Collins Family Foundation Advisory Board. In my resignation letter, I used 2 sentences. Legacy should be earned forward, not backward. I declined to represent names I did not choose. It went viral within the week. Phase 3, I liquidated my voting shares in Collins Capital, every last one. Then anonymously rerouted the funds into a new initiative, Project Fracture, a startup incubator for military spouses and underrepresented founders in tech. No press release, no signature photo op, just transfer. Execution, deployment, the response, mixed, predictable. Lucas tried calling again 7 times in one afternoon. Then came the email, "You made your point. Just tell me what this means for the board." I replied with a PDF, a legal document titled, Termination of Familial Dependency, Collins Entity Removal. Attached a single note, "No more seats, build your own table." My mother sent a gift basket. I didn't open it. She followed up with a card. "We're still your family." I thought about that sentence longer than I should have, then threw it away, not out of spite, out of peace. Because I'd finally learned, family is not who you share the table with. It's who would rebuild it with you if it burned. And they never showed up with tools. Only expectations. Meanwhile, Valkyrie kept growing. Our new headquarters was set to open in 6 months. Not in Midtown Manhattan, like Collins' capital, but in Richmond, Virginia, in a repurposed armory building. We called it the Forge, not just because we built things there, but because we burned things away, too. Old systems, old power, old names. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's death, I visited his grave, not for closure, for acknowledgement. I placed the original silver paperclip on the stone beside his name, then stepped back. No flowers, no prayer, just this. I completed the mission, sir. They'll never know how much you saw ahead of them, but I do. And I'll carry it forward. When I turned to leave, I noticed something. A man stood a few rows away, dressed in a plain black suit, hands folded behind his back. He nodded once. Former military, I guessed. Silent, respectful. He didn't approach, didn't need to, because for people like us, recognition doesn't come from applause. It comes from eye contact. That night I sat alone in my studio. The city outside pulsed with light. Inside, all was quiet. No family name hung on the walls. No coat of arms. No gold-framed portraits of businessmen in suits, just a single canvas. A photograph I had taken myself. Black and white, sharp focus. A paperclip resting on an empty podium. Underneath it, in small letters, she didn't leave the family. She left the illusion. You don't realize you've crossed the finish line until you stop running toward someone else's scoreboard. I wasn't chasing my family's approval anymore. I wasn't disproving their assumptions. I wasn't even angry. I was free. And for the first time, I started asking, what would I build if no one could tell me no? The answer began with a knock. Late one afternoon, in the Forge's second-floor corridor. A narrow hallway we hadn't finished painting yet. I found a young woman standing outside my office door. She wore a faded green jacket with fraying sleeves and held a thin folder like it might bite her. "I'm sorry," she said. "They told me you're the one to talk to if you've ever been told to lower your voice just to stay in the room." I raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific," I replied. She smiled, small, tired, real. "My co used to say that every time I had an opinion." Her name was Jasmine Ortega, former Marine Corps logistics officer, discharged after whistleblowing on unsafe equipment procurement. She'd been blacklisted by her own chain of command. Now, she wanted to build a logistics company that prioritized transparency over margin. "I don't want revenge," she told me. "I want proof that truth can still earn a living." I handed her a coffee, told her to sit down, and opened a new folder on my desk titled Candidates Generation 2. That was how it started, one voice, then another. A former NSA analyst with PTSD and a plan for encrypted health data vaults. A single mother, once a Navy mechanic, now building modular shelters for homeless vets. A soft-spoken codebreaker with social anxiety and an AI-driven system that could trace illegal arms transfers in conflict zones. None of them fit. Every one of them mattered. And slowly, the Forge became more than a building. It became a signal. We didn't advertise, didn't seek headlines, but word spread. You can show up with scars and strategy here. You can wear boots instead of brogues. You don't have to leave your trauma at the door. Just be willing to wield it wisely. Within a year, we launched 14 startups, all founded by post-military or post-systemic survivors. 8 were already profitable. 4 had received Department of Defense pilot interest. And 2, quietly, carefully, were negotiating federal grants for impact infrastructure in cities where no Collins Foundation donor had ever set foot. One morning, while reviewing quarterly reports, I got a handwritten envelope. No return address. No wax seal this time. Inside, a postcard, black and white. A photo of the Forge taken at night. Written in strong, sharp script. Legacy used to mean keeping a name alive. You turned it into lighting the way forward. Good, don't stop. No signature, but I knew the handwriting. General Albright, my grandfather's oldest friend. Some messages don't need confirmation, just clarity. That month, I made it official. We filed paperwork to permanently separate Valkyrie and the Forge from all Collins' financial structures, even the shell ones no one else had traced yet. We didn't just leave the name, we buried it. In its place, the Horizon Accord, a new charter, built on 3 tenets: 1. Resource the invisible. 2. Protect the principled. 3. Never ask permission to do the right thing. A few weeks later, Jasmine stopped by my office again. She held her company's first earnings report, profitable in month 3. "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't said yes when everyone else said I was too loud," she said. I shook my head. "No, you'd still be here. You just would have built it slower, angrier, and maybe alone. But you were always going to build it. All I did was open a door you'd already started kicking in." She laughed. "That sounds exactly like something you'd say." That night I stood on the roof of the Forge. No one around, no lights on, just quiet, wind brushing my face, the city below humming like a second heartbeat. In my pocket, I carried the original paperclip, still intact, not because it was sacred, but because it reminded me I wasn't supposed to be here, and I came anyway. They said I had no legacy, so I built one without their blessing, without their map, without their name, and in doing so, I became the first woman in my bloodline to be remembered for what she built, not what she inherited. 2 years after I walked out of the Collins will reading with a paperclip, I was nominated for Time's Most Influential Woman in National Impact. I didn't even know I'd been nominated. The call came from a journalist, one who'd written 2 scathing pieces about Collins Capital a decade ago. Now she sounded almost reverent. "You've built something that moves under the radar but shifts entire regions," she said. "We think it's time people know your name." I paused. "Which name?" I asked. She was quiet. "The one you built, not the one you were born into." And that's where the conflict began. Because fame, true fame, doesn't just spotlight you. It rebrands you. It reclaims your story on someone else's timeline. And I had just spent 2 years learning how to not belong to anyone. My team was ecstatic. Jasmine was already drafting a press release. My operations lead asked if we should hire a PR advisor. Even Mr. Whittaker sent a bottle of scotch and a handwritten note. "Legacy has found its light. Be ready for the heat." I stared at the bottle all night. Did I want the heat? Or did I finally understand that my strength came from staying unlit? Moving not to be seen, but to make room for others. That week, I received 5 other offers. A documentary series on modern legacy, a TED Talk keynote slot, a 6-figure book deal, a state advisory position, and an invitation to speak at the Collins Foundation annual summit. Yes, them, again. The summit invite came with a card. "We recognize the remarkable work you've done. Would you consider joining us to help shape the next generation of Collins leadership?" I didn't laugh, didn't rage. I just whispered no. Not to them, to myself, because that door wasn't tempting anymore. It was small, and I no longer was. I drafted a public letter. Simple, measured, written in the voice of a woman who no longer owed anyone her volume. "I am honored by the recognition, but I will not be accepting, not because I fear visibility, but because what I build does not require my face to lead it. Power is not presence. Legacy is not spotlight, and my mission is not me. It's the young woman pitching her prototype in a borrowed hoodie, the soldier filing for her patent in a halfway house, the invisible hands holding up systems no one credited them for. They are the story now, let them speak." I never sent the letter to Time. I posted it on the Forge's community page. No hashtags, no tags, just a quiet declaration. By morning, it had been shared over 400,000 times, including by a senator, 2 retired generals, and an 18-year-old girl who captioned it, "This is the kind of woman I want to become." A few days later, Lucas emailed, "Again, I saw your post. Whatever you think of us, Mara, just know we've been watching, and some of us, we wish we defollowed you earlier." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood you don't have to reply to ghosts, especially when the house they haunted no longer has your name on the mailbox. That night, I walked through the Forge alone, each office lit with different hues, different lives, different stories. different directions, and no one looked up when I passed. Not out of disrespect, out of normalcy, because I wasn't the story anymore. And that was the most powerful ending I could ask for. On the wall outside my office, someone had painted a new mural. A hand holding a silver paperclip, surrounded by constellations, and beneath it, she gave us what she never received, a chance to be seen without asking for permission. There was one room in the forge no one ever entered. Not because it was off-limits, because it never seemed open. The keycard reader always blinked red. The staff assumed it was storage, a mechanical room. Maybe unfinished, I never questioned it. In a building full of motion, one still space didn't feel threatening. Until one morning, Mr. Whittaker called. His voice was softer than usual. "Did you ever open the room labeled B4? The one beneath the main stairwell?" "No," I said, curious now. "Why?" A pause. "Your grandfather had it added, quietly, before construction was finalized. He called it the observation room. Said it wasn't for strategy, it was for her." I didn't need to ask who her was. That afternoon, I stood outside the steel door marked B4. It had no handle, no keypad, just a flush black panel. I touched it. It lit up for the first time, and displayed one word. "Welcome back." The door slid open. No sound. Inside, the room was unlike anything else in the forge. No screens, no whiteboards, no charts or mission briefs, just wood floors, warm walls. Soft light filtering through a narrow window cut high into the concrete. A small table sat in the center. 2 chairs, and on the wall across from me, a single photograph. It was me, 18 years old, hair in a low ponytail, holding my first camera, looking up, not at the lens, but at someone I trusted. I'd forgotten that photo existed. Beneath it, a brass plate. "She sees what they miss." I sank into the chair. Not as a director, not as a daughter, not as a name, just Mara, and for the first time in years, I felt everything I had held off. The nights alone in barracks with voices in my head louder than bombs, the sting of being dismissed by your own blood, the weight of building something out of nothing but silence and belief. There was a drawer in the table. I opened it. Inside, a notebook, leather-bound, old, unmarked. I flipped through the pages, my grandfather's handwriting, letters he never sent, to me. May 14th, she turned down Harvard, joined the Army. I didn't show it, but I've never been prouder. Not because she chose service, but because she chose herself. Sept 3rd, Gregory still doesn't understand her. Thinks silence equals defiance. I think silence is where her truest voice lives. Nov 18th, I bought back one of her photos today. She doesn't know, but it's hanging in my study. The one with the child on the steps, holding a lunchbox. She captured something I haven't seen in 40 years, dignity without words. I closed the notebook and let myself breathe, fully, deeply, without armor. No enemy, no audience. No test, just this room, this moment. This truth, I was never invisible. I was being observed, understood, prepared. On the shelf behind the table sat a small wooden box. I opened it. Inside, the original silver paperclip. Not the replica I wore, the one, slightly bent, smooth from age, and beneath it, a folded slip of paper. In his unmistakable handwriting, "Some doors aren't meant to lead anywhere. They're meant to be closed, only when you're ready to rest." I left the room, didn't lock it, didn't tell anyone it was open now. Some spaces don't need announcements, only readiness, and I was finally ready. To stop running,